after Warrior aired and saw the power of representation and authentic storytelling and how it affected people. And then when we moved into season two and it opened during the pandemic, I really saw the power of good storytelling and authenticity and the need for representation.
Welcome to The Tiger in the Room. My name is Hannah, and I'll be your host. We are a podcast series that is here to talk about the current and ongoing national crisis of anti-Asian hate crimes. A lot of us first heard about anti-Asian hate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that hate against Asians and Asian Americans is not just seen in acts of violence. It is also seen when our community is silenced, invisibilized, and erased. We plan to talk about the challenges that modern-day Asian Americans face every day, whether it's in the workplace, in public, in media, and so on. We also talk to the organizers, activists, and change makers who are fighting for our community and fighting for change. We hope you'll join us. Our guest today is Perry Young, a New York City-based actor and musician who works in contemporary performance art, television, and film. You might have seen him on the hit HBO Max series show Warrior, where he plays the fearsome leader of the Hop Wei Tong, Father Jun. He is also a traditionally trained Japanese shakuhachi flute craftsman and musician, and has been leading flute making and workshops in temples and colleges across the country. We talked to Perry about what inspired him to become an activist for the Asian community, his experience as an Asian actor in Hollywood, and his thoughts on how the Asian American community has changed over the generations, from the 60s to now. We also asked Perry, does it take a certain type of Asian actor to agree to appear on a show like Warrior? And his thoughts on how Hollywood can change the perception of what an Asian character can represent. This interview with Perry Young was recorded on June 24th, 2023. First of all, before I just dive right in, congratulations, season 3 of Warrior coming out next Thursday. I'm very excited. I'm a huge fan of the show. How has it been? Are you kind of in the middle of a lot of just press for that right now? Has it been busy?
I am very excited for it. The cast has remained close friends after the ending of season 2. And when we found out that we weren't going to be continued, this was around 2019. And we were told we weren't going to have a season 3. We were just so devastated. But we stayed together because it was just such a great group of people, not just the cast members, actors, but also the showrunners, the writers. And even like costuming and makeup people. It was a really cool show to be on, with generally really great vibes. So, so to get it back, and to be back filming and now seeing the fruition of all that work and all the fans that came together in social media to actually, push for a season 3. I think there's so many people involved in making that happen that it's just a privilege to be a part of it and to witness this sort of thing that is rare, that almost never happens for a television show to come back after it's been canceled. And it went from when it was closed, a Cinemax production, which was a smaller production of HBO, to HBO. So it bumped up, and so now there's more eyes on it. There's more publicity. It's on a bigger platform, and I could feel it. I think people can really feel that there's something big that's going to happen.
I think that's incredible to know that there was such a interest from the fan base to bring that show back. I know a lot of us during the middle of 2020 and 2021 discovered the show as well in light of everything that was going on and found a lot of comfort in it. I definitely want to dig into Warrior in just a moment, but just want to definitely touch on just the activism that you've been doing in the Asian American community, specifically here in New York City. You and I met a few months ago at the rally in Times Square that was hosted by Stand With Asian Americans, which was organized to recognize the 2-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa shootings. So, I understand you're a very frequent presence at these types of events. You're obviously a public figure now. I'd love to just hear, what motivated you to start getting, involved in this type of activism and what inspires you to speak out.
Well, I've always been an activist in terms of it being done through my art. So I studied art in college. I have my degree in art. I also have a minor in Asian American Studies. And when I started Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University, suddenly like my world just blew up. It was like I had never known how much, how all the barriers that surrounds people of color and women, until you study it and until you study systemic oppression and institutionalized racism, you don't know how prevalent it is among us every day in everything we do and see, whether you're seeking job, education, housing, getting into the arts, everything is guided by these systems. And these systems that were started many years ago that were embedded in our constitution that supports free white men. So in knowing that, as I was doing my art, I wanted to just use my art as my voice for activism, because I'm not a politician and not a lawyer. The only way I feel like that I could become an activist was through my art and music. So I did that. I would put my identity markers in my visual artworks to show that, there are hybrid Americans that aren't just white and that we are fully American and things like that. And when I moved to New York to be a performance artist, theater person, I started the Slant Performance Group with two other Asian American friends, Richard R. Ebahara, who's fifth generation Japanese, and Waylon Quintero, who's third generation Filipino Hawaiian. And I'm, first and fourth generation Chinese American. Mm-hmm. So, we thought like, here's an opportunity to say something about our culture in our voice, which is experimental theater and music. So we, the name of our group that sounded the most perfect for us was Slant. And, why is that? It's just like our theater group questioned society and what that label meant, the label of the language of the masters, as some would say, what that meant and how that it was imposed upon us. And we were sort of influenced by the gay queer community to own that word and reinvent that word, to disempower that word in terms of its change, to reinvent the word and let us gain a new meaning for it. It's kind of like the N word for African-American communities. I mean, it's controversial, to whether you use it or not, and how and why do we use it. So those are all the things we felt like we needed to address. And so I did most of my work as an artist, and I was influenced heavily by Fred Ho and his Afro-Asian American Art Ensemble, who told all of Fred's operas were done with African-American musicians, Asian musicians, and Asian American musicians on different instruments, and told our story of America in America. And dear friend Corky Lee, who was a photographer and called his camera the Sword of Justice. So these were my great mentors in artivism, and Fred actually was more active in actually being a spokesperson. Every time he spoke about his work, he was quite articulate about racism and white supremacy, systemic white supremacy in our system. So I never felt like I was more comfortable as a spokesperson. I was more comfortable doing it through my art. But after Warrior aired and saw the power of representation and authentic storytelling and how it affected people. And then when we moved into season 2 and it opened during the pandemic, I really saw the power of good storytelling and authenticity and the need for representation and guidance and speakers. So I had gotten direct DMs on my Instagram, Facebook about Father Jun and his authority over Chinatown and his sort of activism at that time against racism. Saying he produced the Tong to fight the violence of the ducks. That's one of the guiding things that drive my characters. Is that's why he's a leader of this nefarious, organization, is to prevent violence upon our people. And that resonated with a lot of the audience for Warrior. So they were asking me, Perry Young, the actor, to speak out publicly about the racism and violence that was blowing up during the pandemic. And I saw it as an opportunity to sort of allow myself to grow into that role, to sort of get out of my comfort zone of being an artist activist to being a spokesperson. I mean, I'm learning. It's a bumpy road. It's a challenging road, but ultimately, it's quite fulfilling, and I'm still learning every day.
On that topic, I don't know if this is something that's controversial to bring up, but I did feel that Warrior was a show that not many mainstream celebrities were talking about, at least mainstream, Asian American celebrities. And it occurred to me that whether that was intentional or not, I don't know, but I could see a situation in which maybe they felt like they wanted to distance themselves a bit from the show because of the way the show portrays racism and white people and the racism that white people enacted among the Chinese American community. And when I see actors like yourself and Olivia Chang and Jason Tobin, who are very vocal about Asian hate and are very pro-Asian and are not, shy to promote that on social media, I just wonder, do you think there are certain Asian American actors who may choose to feel like a show like that is too political for them to be involved in?
From my perspective and experience in doing roles out there in Hollywood, I would say, oh, that role is not for me, because I don't want to feel obligated to address issues that are bigger than myself, that exist out there with many different viewpoints and are complicated. I think what you're raising is actually quite complex to each individual, because it kind of challenges the notion of our own behavior, our own road and path that we choose in the world. And if you choose to not address oppression, then are you in collusion with oppression? Essentially that comes down to it. Like if we see some of the issues of being a spokesperson against abuse that can actually hurt your career, that's, I think, kowtowing to the pressures of systemic oppression. You are part of the oppression if you don't speak out against it. And that's somewhat internalized also. And I'm just talking about myself, like I'm not about anybody else out there and the choices they make. So I could see how when you're going out there in the world and trying to, as an actor, get an audition, that people might look at your work and see what you have done. And depending on the production, if you're doing something, for example, that's YA oriented, very, for young audiences, families, and then they've seen you do some work that's kind of, violent and pornographic, they're not going to hire you. You do that kind of work and it might not be fitting for their brand. So yes, I think that what you say might exist. People might not want to do Warrior or present it because it attacks a systemic white supremacy, and they don't want to be associated with that. My personal feeling is, if you don't do that, if you don't acknowledge and support and praise people that are fighting that, then you are part of systemic oppression.
I felt like the show was so unapologetic in how it portrayed exactly what you said, how white supremacy has oppressed Asians just as it has other, minority groups throughout the history of this country. Even just, the way the characters in the show, the Chinese characters, really were able to have so much nuance to them as well. I felt it was very powerful. It's just something I have never really seen on a show. Even just seeing a song, say in the opening scene, I didn't travel all the way here to deal with a couple, I can't say it's an expletive, but there was a certain empowerment that I felt I just never saw really with a lot of Asian American actors or characters. I actually would love to talk to you more about that. Just the nuance to which that show really captured these characters, even from, calling the white people ducks, or the way they showed how these characters spoke fluent English to each other, but in front of the white characters, they're clearly speaking accents in English, just to bring that level of humanity. Can you talk to me about what it was like to be part of a show that really went to that level of detail to capture like that kind of nuance among Asian American characters?
Well, it's a dream come true. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I mean, when I first started as a stage actor and performance artist, a lot of people were like, hey, you should do television and film. I can get you an agent and blah, et cetera. I tried. This was the early 90s. There was nothing available for someone like me at that time. Nothing. I'm talking about maybe the one episode per year on Law and Order where they went to Chinatown to deal with some, prostitution ring, So those were the only things available at that time. And so I dropped out. I didn't try anymore. I just stopped doing television and film because every audition I was going to was just horrible, one-dimensional stereotype character that served the white narrative. You know, how do we use that Asian character to tell our story? And so that didn't work for me. I was like, I cannot be a part of television and film if that's what it's going to do to the Chinese American, Asian American culture. So I just stayed in theater. Slant was doing some amazing work I was really proud of. And experimental theater in general in downtown New York is much more open-minded and more about investigating culture than, you know, the commercial aspects of what television is. So it was a much funner playground, and I stayed in that world. But when I saw the culture change, I saw Daniel Day Kim on Lost. I saw Justin Lin's Better Luck Tomorrow. Netflix and streaming was coming in, and suddenly there was more content for BIPOC and women, you know, and then Asian American characters, which didn't exist before, right? So now we're having an explosion of content, all kinds of content that was more specialized. You know, back then we only had the 3 major television stations, you know, and that was just like you couldn't get into those gates. The gatekeepers were extremely powerful, and those gates were high. So when I saw the shift, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try auditioning again, and things happened, you know, and so I got my first film TV thing around 2013. And then I started to see the landscape change dramatically. I started to see non-traditional casting. AAPI voices were loud in terms of we want more representation that's not just centered on our race. We want to play normal, regular people that can be anyone, you know? And then that's great too. So I started auditioning things that was, you know, Joe Smith, you know, and which meant that we could actually just see the color or representation of ethnicity on the screen and be regular people, which was amazing. But I also thought that our story still isn't told. You know, the Asian American perspective and sensibility and history is still not examined. I'm not even talking about deeply, but just scratching the surface. I think Warrior is just scratching the surface of what our history truly is. It's complicated, and it's dynamic, and it's rich, and it's beautiful, and it's ugly too, you know? So when I got into Warrior, it was like when I read the monologue of Father Jun to audition, I went, oh my God, this role is meant for me. You know, I'm Father, you know, right away it spoke to me as like I've never read something that was so closely related to who I was, you know, my sensibility in terms of being a Chinatown person wanting to fight oppression and racism. It's all in the writing. Knowing that Jonathan Tropper and Shannon Lee and Justin Lin were all a part of the writing team, I knew we were in good hands because they just wanted to write something that was real, was authentic, empowered Asian actors, gave us a real voice. And then they gave it to the hands of the actors to interpret. So that was the next level, right? So we have a great script, and then it's up to the actors to elevate it into something else. And what you were saying about the nuances, it's like when I watch my actors, fellow cast members act, I'm going, oh my God, I'm so in love with them. They're so good, you know, because off screen, they're completely different.
I could see the angle that people saw how Father Jun was almost like playing the role of this godfather or savior of Chinatown and trying to set up the Tongs to fight white supremacy. But at the same time, there was also a lot of infighting between the Tongs, almost like from the get-go when the first season started. And when I saw that, it just reminded me so much of how there is, in my opinion, still quite a bit of infighting within the Asian American community, especially among activist circles. I felt like I saw a lot of this, especially during 2020 and 2021, where there seemed to be just like conversations as to who should be representing us, like who represents our community the best, who's pro-Asian, who's not Asian enough, who's too radical. You know, and when Andrew Yang was running for mayor, I felt like you saw that really come out. Like there were Asians who were just like never Andrew Yang and pro Andrew Yang. I just wanted to ask your opinion on that. Why is it that we just always fight amongst each other?
Humans just like to fight for power. You know, it's a hierarchy. So it's a part of human, I would say, just, you know, anecdotally, it's just my opinion. It's not something I studied, but power corrupts and people want power, and there's a hierarchy, and hierarchy is part of capitalism. We want to be above the other, to own the ideology. I mean, it's not just in Asian American communities, right? It's in white communities. Look at Democrats and Republicans. I mean, and you can look within the family itself, like a sibling rivalry. So I don't really know if there is an answer or a fix for that, except for love, like love thy neighbor, have some compassion, serve the person you're with. In Buddhism, is if you just have compassion and empathy and love and serve, your life will be so much, I don't know, kinder, easier, gentler, happier. That's just my own personal philosophy. I don't want to, push that upon anyone else. But, I don't really have an answer other than that it's a human condition. We fight each other. We want to prove that the other person is wrong so that we're right, essentially. So, and my activism is always based on love. How can we solve this through love? I think Oscar Wilde said, the only way and the best way to beat your enemy is to make them your friend.
That's a very important thing to keep in mind, especially with the Asian community. We need to remember we should be united. I think that's honestly gotten better over the years, especially with what's happening during 2020, with everything that happened during COVID.
But, stronger together.
Yeah, stronger together. Exactly. You touched on this earlier, just being first and fourth generation Chinese American. And I did some research and I learned that your great grandfather actually had immigrated to this country to work on the railroads, and your own parents had immigrated here just shortly after the end of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Those are two very significant moments in Asian American history. I think perhaps the only two events most people might be familiar with if they know about Asian American history. For me, growing up in Flushing, I personally did not know many Asian Americans who are past two generations. So I would love to just learn more about that. What was that like? Maybe you didn't feel any sort of difference about it, being from San Francisco and moving here, but just curious, what it was like to know that your family has kind of gone through that kind of history.
Well, this is the really interesting thing about being an American, right? I was raised with public schooling in America, and I never learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act until college. Really, I've heard and learned about Japanese relocation or the American concentration camps for Japanese Americans in high school, but I didn't really learn about Chinese Exclusion Act and Yellow Peril. So when I went to do my minor in Asian American Studies, it sort of went, oh my God, my life is like Chinese American History 101. Like my family experienced all of that. And, before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, there was the Page Act of around 1860, that prevented Chinese women from entering the country. So as soon as the Chinese were immigrating, somebody thought, hey, we should stop the women from coming into this country because, what will happen? They'll start raising families here. So they basically stopped Asian women from coming into the country. And the reasoning was because they're prostitutes. That's in the law, So there was a ban on Asian women, Chinese women, and then there was a ban on Chinese men. So that when I learned about the Page Act, I went, oh my God. That's why I never met my grandmothers, because of these immigration laws that were prevented migration. It made it really difficult to bring my grandmothers. And by the time things opened up, they were too old to travel, and they passed away even before then. But it was like I started to learn about myself through education, not just critical race theory, but just proper factual education is important. I'm not even talking about being critical of racism, but just real facts of our history. So learning that, and then learning that my father, my great grandfather worked on the railroads was really empowering, and then like why he could never then bring his son over was because like if he had left the country, then he might not be able to get back in. It was one of those paper son moments, and there's a lot of plays about that, although there's none about not a lot of film or TV about that moment. Um, so just knowing that, like, how I ended up being the first here, and when my great grandfather was actually building the railroads, was all decided by oppressive laws.
Mhm.
And it just made me more inquisitive into, like, wanting to know more. Um, and I started to figure out my history through the education, because like a lot of Asian parents, Chinese parents, they don't really talk too much about history. I've tried to ask my mom back then when she was alive. She was like, things were horrible back then. Why would you want to know about that? Let's
Yeah.
not dredge that up. She lived through the Japanese invasion, in China and all that stuff. So it's like, I don't want to talk about my childhood. But if you do study law and American history, you can figure out your history, which is something that just kind of like inspired me to be an activist, is because had I known this sooner, I would have made a lot of different choices.
Are there any stories that your family shared about what it was like when they were here in this country, or just some of the things that they experienced in terms of that racism? If you're comfortable sharing.
My great grandfather, that was you know working on the railroads, that ended up in Chicago when the railroads were finished, and Chinatowns grew in different parts of where the tracks were laid, right? Because when it was done, they were just kind of stuck there. It's like, what do we do now? So my great grandfather was in Chicago, and he eked out a living there, and bought or started a laundry business. And so one of my cousins was doing the genealogy, and found the graveyard that he was buried at, and that's only fairly recently. So I'm actually planning a trip to go to Chicago to pay my respects to my great grandfather. So those are really interesting things that, for me, what I would like to discover and learn, because the laws of this country is what sort of like created all these
Mhm.
fractures in my history that now I have to dig in and try to find out. But in terms of racism, just as because I was the firstborn here, and saw my parents as first generations assimilate, and that's struggling with learning the language, struggling to find a decent paying job. The Asian American community is incredibly diverse. And especially after the immigration quota lifted, and the Chinese exclusion law ended, when the Chinese exclusion law ended in the 1940s, they didn't actually lift the quota. They just ended it. So a few more Chinese came in, but not that much more. And it wasn't until 1965 that they truly lifted the quotas. So much more, Asian in general, not just Chinese, immigrated legally. And and the population exploded from like 2.5% to like 4 or 5% within that time period. And now Asian Americans are like 6 or 7% of the population. So most of our population are still immigrants. And that's very different from the smaller handful of fourth and fifth generation Asian Americans that
Mhm.
have a very different sensibility, perspective, and look at American society. So everything you said is true. There's still a lot of misunderstanding of each other. I mean, some very problematic things obviously are when the label model minority was put on us. I think that's a really gross misrepresentation of who Asian Americans are. We certainly, most of us, when I first heard of the stereotype in the 80s, I think, I went like, wait, I don't have a BMW. I don't own a business, What are they talking about? None of my family and friends do in Chinatown. We are not the model. Who are they? Are they talking about Japanese Americans? And so, in studying that label, it was really to divide and conquer, right? So if we look at these labels, and we sort of assimilate or adopt capitalistic hierarchical views of how we could behave in this society, we're going to want to divide ourselves and separate ourselves. And I guess it harkens back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like I really feel like our culture, especially people of color, women, BIPOC, really need to understand solidarity and power stronger together.
just growing up as an Asian American, like in the 60s and 70s to like now, how have you seen the community changed over the years?
So that's complicated too, because I'm
Yeah.
from California, and California has a much longer history of
Mm.
Asian American identity. And actually, San Francisco State and UC Berkeley was the place that coined the term Asian American identity, because the idea that we think we're Americans as Asians didn't exist until academia put it on the map. And so that we had to name it, right, in order to like understand it. So Asian Americans in California were sort of ahead of the curve in terms of the East Coast, because of the Japanese relocation and the yellow peril from the 1860s and 1870s. We had a longer history in California about understanding our place in America and how we can actually be a part of it or fight it. I think when I moved to New York, I realized it wasn't the same consensus. The idea of identity, Asian American identity, was broader than in California, because in California, it was more like you had to have an Americanness that made you political. In New York City, it was just if you were Asian and in America, you're Asian American. That's a very different thing. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's broader. So it didn't challenge the political perspective of your history in America, because you can come from any other Asian country, go to school here, and you might go, "Oh, I'm Asian American because I'm here," and I'm an Asian in America, so I'm here. And all that is like put on us also, not just on ourselves, but from, media, who describes who actually, we know when they talk about census things like, Hispanic voters do this, Black voters are this, white voters are this. There's no mention of Asian American voters, and you go, wait, we vote, and sometimes they commingle us with whites, like Asians and whites do this, but blacks and Latinos do this, or Hispanics do this. So it's like, we're not white. Why are you commingling, adding us to that demographic in the census, especially in college education and academia, right? So I think that it's growing. The pandemic has made a lot of organizations form to fight anti-racism. I was really proud to see the galvanization of different groups to come together, like Chinatown Love, Flushing, Main Street Patrol, all these organizations, TAF, the Asian American Foundation, have formed in the pandemic, because we now are realizing no one else is going to protect us but us. So let's do this for us, and it was kind of heartening to see how TAF formed. And you had four in their opening video to announce the formation of TAF, the Asian American Foundation. You had four ex-presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Carter, saying it's great that we have this organization. We are in 100% support of this organization because it's about time. Of course, the one living ex-president that was missing was Trump, because he's a part of the problem, right? So, and it was fitting that he wasn't there, because he's the opposite of what we represent and what we're striving for. So there is a change. There's a positive change and growth and understanding and galvanization of our communities. There still needs to be better dialogue to connect us. It's kind of like there are ideologues out there, who's trying to tell us, which is the right way, but eventually we are all the right way if we're operating together to fight systemic, oppression.
That's a lot. I really appreciate that insight, because I totally can relate to your description of how the East Coast Asian community may have defined that, because I think there is just more recent immigrant generations here. That idea of what Asian Americanness is has not really been fully fleshed out yet. It's like just something that we don't really have to opt into. It's just what we are. We're an Asian in America. But you're absolutely right. There is a political implication of that, which we're seeing, especially now, like with people now talking about the Asian American vote in earnest, especially like in the Bay Area. There's been, things about the DA there and how the Asian American community came together to vote him out and just really push for change. I want to talk about, like, just to go back to what you mentioned about Stop Asian Hate. That was the first movement in my lifetime that I ever saw, this huge galvanizing of Asian Americans. And growing up, I always just thought I would never see anything like that in my lifetime, because I just didn't see Asians getting loud. They were very much like, we don't make noise. I mean, we know racism happens, but we just don't trouble ourselves like that. And we certainly don't organize and march down the streets and scream about, white supremacy, but it happened. You've been involved in this activism space for so long, and to see a movement of that scale where the entire country was united, what were your thoughts on that? And do you feel like it had the impact that we needed at the time?
I mean, it's great to see, it's heartening to see, but we need more of it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is the thing about education. It's like we need to know more about Vincent Chin. What happened during Vincent Chin's murder, right? As a Chinese American who was murdered because the ex-auto workers thought he was Japanese. His mother went on trial pleading, and she ended up leaving the country, going back to China because she goes, this is just so unfair, because those two white murderers got off the hook. Basically they were slapped with $2,000 fine and released. And then that started, I think, the first or the second wave of actually Asian American demonstrations. So Helen Z, one of the lawyers, one of the lawyers of the case, really was the one that pulled together this amazing rainbow coalition at the time, with Jesse Jackson coming and marching with the Asian American community, because it was like a terrible, unjust, just failure of justice. And it was huge. I think that if we knew that they did that, we'd be inspired to do more of that. But we don't know because it's so buried in education. That we know that the fact that Asian Americans came together across the United States with the Black community, they marched with us. Jesse Jackson was there calling on this march. Terrible miscarriage of justice, right? If we'd seen that kind of solidarity back then and we continue to build upon it, we'd be at a very different place today. So, as part of the reason for white, editors to not show those things on the news, because it's empowering, BIPOC and women. So it's better to bury that kind of history. Again, it's out there and it's in the past. If we want to look it up, it's, powerful images of Asians and Blacks marching together. And even during the Black Panther arrests, we had Asian Americans coming out in Oakland, California, those photographs. They're not like they weren't the norm, but they were more rare, but they exist. And those things could be seeds for us, and I think that we should promote those things, images of them, because it's solidarity, and it's, again, together stronger. If you're a recent immigrant and you're dropped into a predominantly Black neighborhood, and Black people see you as something that's, sort of like living off of them, and you actually don't know how to, engage with them because of systemic and historical sort of, conditioned situations that create that sort of antagonism. Those things exist. Those things are real. And it takes, I would say, like a therapist to talk to both sides and find an agreement on why we behave this way. So that therapist doesn't exist, in social media and government. So it's up to the artists, I think, to hey, let's make a film about this, which there are documentaries about that, and calling out, why redlining these real estate causes that sort of racism, like Black people and poor communities are put next to each other that culturally don't understand each other. So there's going to be a rub in the wrong way. That does exist, and it is anti-Black. And I would say that we all need anti-Black training.
Certainly, I think the roots of white supremacy we've seen that have some of the worst impact in the history of this country, specifically towards the Black community. And those are things that I think history has still not fully accounted for yet. And to your point about artists playing a role in that, how do you see your role as an artist and an activist, having Hollywood continue to push for better telling of Asian stories and just being a better representative of our community, especially with the success of Warrior? Has that sort of inspired you to only seek out certain types of projects, or perhaps start some of your own?
I'm at a certain age where everything matters now, what I do,
Mhm.
and my time matters because, it's like you start to realize time is the most important thing, time and health. Like money really doesn't matter. And then what do you do with that time? Do you waste it? I mean, so I would like to eventually leave some lasting artwork that is an inspiration for a future generation to think outside of the box. I mean, my favorite artists all broke the box, right? They didn't fit into the box, made their own boxes because their world was so unique that they couldn't fit and tell someone else's story. Bruce Lee is one of my greatest examples, because he just did not fit into the box of Hollywood, and he tried, and they didn't want him. So at that time, his only choice was, the iPhone didn't exist, so he couldn't make his own movies. But he went back to Hong Kong because that world accepted him. And so when he had that amount of talent in a world that accepted him, look what happened. It just blew up, right? So I'm inspired by that true vision, voice, and desire, the grit that he had. I read one interview where his bottom line of what he does is to share with the world the true beauty of the Chinese culture. I mean, if that's his only intention, it's a worthy intention. And I would say that I can adopt that intention as also my own, and maybe expand it to the Asian American Pacific Islander, sensibility. Like, I want people to see how beautiful our culture is, and actually, have empathy. And because I saw culture change when Bruce Lee came about. I talked earlier about being raised in Oakland as a kid. Oakland's Chinatown, next to West Oakland, and Broadway was the sort of border. And on Broadway was the Grindhouse theaters, where they played 3 movies for $1 all summer long in the 1970s. We used to go see them, and we'd see these gory, slasher movies with kung fu movies from Hong Kong. And it'd be a little dangerous for us. We'd go in there, we might get picked on and maybe not, but we knew what the vibe was. It was electric, right? But when Bruce Lee came on, that changed everything. We no longer felt threatened. We would go to see movies and we'd see like smiling faces at us and go, hey, show us some of that stuff, like just do a kick for me. It was great because before that it was like, give me your lunch money, So not, and then I remember the day Enter the Dragon premiered in downtown Oakland. And, me and a gang of friends went, we're like 11 years old, walked to the Lux Theater down Broadway. And we just stopped because the line around the corner, the line to the theater went around the corner, all Black and brown people. And we were like, we stepped up with trepidation. And then suddenly we were getting all these little high fives. They were all wearing Chinese kung fu outfits and everything. And you're like, Bruce Lee changed the culture. He changed our world simply for being who he was. So that's the kind of thing that I aspire to do. I'm not saying I will ever do anything like that at all, but just because of the sheer fact that he wanted to share the beauty of the Chinese culture with the world, he changed it, and for the better.
Thank you for sharing that. That's an incredible story, and I think it is a testament to his legacy that this might be a bit of a Debbie Downer, but I think there was a study that shows he's actually the only Asian American famous person that most Americans know about. The 2 most common answers I think they found was Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and Jackie Chan's not even American. So it's a testament, like you said, to his legacy, but I think also a sign that we need more Bruce Lees. It's been over 50 years, and he still remains the only one for a lot of non-Asian Americans. So it's a good reminder that the work is continuing. What's one call to action that you would want to say to the Asian American community in light of these times and just a lot of things that are happening in the news right now?
Step outside of your own need and see what your fellow Asian American person needs, and try to be part of the change, be a part of the positive change, even if it's for one person, your friend, neighbor, brother, sister, parent that needs something in the moment. Because I think being able to give somebody a moment to be heard and supported, it's a lasting healing gift, and it costs you nothing.
Be less. I don't want to say selfish is the right word, but think bigger beyond yourself and think
Yeah,
about other
selfish is a
people.
good word to use.
Try to maintain the positive vibe. But I think it's a very important reminder for us.
Can I add one thing? Earlier, you
Absolutely.
were asking my need and desire. It's like, okay, so um, my recent band, Judo Club, recorded a song called Stop Asian Hate, written by Billy Asai. So we're making a film on it because we thought the best way to really tell the story through music is also visually through a short film. And so that is the thing. It's like the four of us members, Richard Abhara, who I also work with in Slant, Jun Suenega, who's a Japanese American, and Billy Asai, who's Japanese American, are just putting our hearts and soul into this song and film because nobody else is going to do it. And so I think for anybody who wants to sort of do something, just do it. Do it the way that you will do it, not somebody else. But whether it's writing a poem and putting it out there, making art, or just going to a food bank, or like again, those people who started Chinatown Love and Main Street Patrol. Do that thing that only you will do, and it will be so empowering, and it will affect so many people. It will just ripple like this tiny drop in an ocean. It will cause an immeasurable effect. Maybe not immediately, but over time it will. So with the right heart, passion, vision, and desire, you can change the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very important message. And, if I could just even add to that, look to do things without expecting, recognition or expecting people to give you something for it. Just do it because it's the right thing to do. Are there any, projects that are coming up for you? Anything exciting that you're looking forward to that we should know about?
Well, the Stop Asian Hate film is something I'm working on. We just shot the raw footage last night, the principal photography. We're going to go into post-production. So I'm going to do a Kickstarter fundraising campaign to finish it in post-production because that's where a lot of money is. And the four of us and the filmmaker, Francisco Ali Wallace, just put in our own time and money to make the film. And so that's one thing I'm really passionate about. I think it's going to be an incredible little film. I'm in this new Netflix series called Three Body Problem that's going to air over, I think, January. So this is all coming up. I think that I'm just personally have a lot of gratitude and privilege for what Warrior brings me. We're going to have our premiere on June 29th here in New York City. And it's just kind of amazing how I feel like there's so much, more. I think going back to what we said earlier, there's so much more for an Asian American actor, especially at my age, to be able to work in this industry than ever before. And the roles are better than ever before. So I just want to say, keep up the great work because it's about the community. It's about the showrunners, the writers, the producers, all the people behind the scenes, all the actors that are asking for it, all the actors that are on set fighting for better roles, arguing with the writer and the director on the set, saying, "Can you change this line? Because it would mean so much to me if you change this line, to this." And believe it or not, a lot of them are agreeable. They just don't know any better, and it's up to us, the historically silenced actor, to feel empowered to say, I can change them because they don't know.
Maybe this timing is exactly, your time to step into these types of roles. And, I must say, I feel you play an Asian father very, very well. I feel like you've been cast in a lot of these roles. I watched Boogie and I was just like, this is very familiar.
Oh, wow.
In some ways, in a good way. You need the right kind of person to be able to play those roles too, who understands where that comes from as well. So I think hopefully, we'll continue to see a lot more of that for you. Last question just for me. Is there like a dream role that you would like to play someday? If, there were no limits whatsoever, who would you love to play in a movie or a show?
I'd like to play me.
Okay.
Actually, I've been working on my own little script for my experience of being uprooted in Oakland and having my dad bought a Chinese restaurant in the middle of Texas. And so as a 12-year-old, I moved to Texas and like was suddenly, washing dishes and frying egg rolls. And one time going, what the heck am I doing here? And going to public school and realizing I'm the only Chinese in that school. And it's really funny, because that's where I learned how to play guitar, and the guitar saved my life. So it's one of those things where, you can look to art and music to pull you out of your surroundings. It's a family story that's just based on finding love where you could find it. I think my only real impetus to do it is for my children, so they could actually learn and see where I came from, and why I'm the tough dad sometimes.
I would love to see that when you're ready to produce it. That already sounds like a great plot line. So look forward to that, and as well as the many projects you have coming up. And thank you always for being the voice of just emphasizing love and positiveness among the community. So we also really appreciate all the work that you do. On the next episode of The Tiger in the Room, we sit down with Justin Zhu, a Bay Area native and founder and executive director of Stand with Asian Americans. Stand with Asian Americans is a nonprofit organization advocating against Asian discrimination in the workplace. In our upcoming episode, we sit down with Justin to explore his personal journey as a tech CEO and founder and his experience with discrimination in the industry. Join us as he shares his story, shedding light on the challenges he's encountered and the pivotal moments in his career that have led him to become a fervent advocate for the Asian community in both the workplace and the broader Bay Area.